get a win next week, you'd imagine. But then Virginia Tech certainly seems to be in doubt as we stand. Speaking with Ryan Decker. Yeah, as we're speaking with Ryan Decker here, WBOY, on our college football edition of Pittsburgh Postgame on PSL. I'm Mike Asti. Hit that subscribe button. We are now going to transition over to a team that did win a game over there at our flagship over there at Pittsburgh Sports now. Pitt picked up a victory. So be a little bit more of a positive conversation for the Pitt fans tuning into this segment of the show. Pitt with a big win over UMass. Kenny Pickett turned it on. The Kenny Pickett show existed. Although, of course, 51-7, the final score. It is UMass. So Ray Porter Jr. from Media Today joining me here on the show. Ray, definitely appreciate you joining me. Definitely appreciate you from your undisclosed location there inside covering the game. I've done shows at that exact spot that I recommended you go to in this situation. But Ray, how do you gauge this Pitt team from this game? Because obviously Pitt took care of business. Kenny looked great. Certainly expectations on Pitt this year as a team, on him in general, on the defense, on Narduzzi. We're seeing some colleagues, we're seeing some people expecting 9-10 wins as being possible. It's not necessarily murderer's row of a schedule, besides the usual ACC suspects. You get a shellacking of UMass, but it is UMass. You're not going to do this to most teams. Kenny Pickett's going to have a tougher time against other teams, you would imagine. So a big win, but UMass. How can you gauge this Pitt team from this game moving forward now into tougher games coming up?
Yes, sir. Definitely a great question. And greetings. It's great to be here, Mike, and to you as well, Ryan. It is a greeting. You went through the memory lane with all the West Virginia names there, Pat Royd, and I wanted to hear Steve Slayton.
Well, Lady Brown's doing it enough that I guess they don't have to wax poetic about Steve Slayton. But
for sure. But
that's where the program is right now.
The game itself, it kind of reminds me of something that Mike Tomlin always says when a game goes well. Pitt was very consistent in all three phases, in offense, defense, as well as special teams. Even the missed extra point. I mean, when you're up like 13 points, a missed extra point's not going to hurt you.
Sure.
But the fact is that they were just very consistent, and it's easy to say you're supposed to win games like this, but I think the biggest trap to a game like this is when you think you're coming in here and all you have to do is show up, and then you get surprised. But Pitt was prepared. And they were ready, and they did what they were supposed to do, and took advantage of scoring opportunities on pretty much most of the drives. And I was also very impressive with quarterback Kenny Pickett as well. He looked confident. He looked like the savvy leader that everybody has said he is, and he's always a good guy, good gentleman. I remember one time he called me sir. Now at the expense of him making me feel old. But,
I was gonna say it makes me feel old too. Covering college teams, to be honest with you, yeah.
But he's a nice young man and very humble. And the way he was putting the ball downfield, he was going for broke a lot more than I've seen him. And I was very impressed with that. He got the passes to Jordan Addison, who scored a touchdown. And how about the graduate transfer from Maryland, Jared Cruel?
Yeah, right.
6'5", but 6'6", 250. Oh my goodness! And he can move too. He's going to be a critical target, especially in the red zone. He scored their second touchdown, and to see, I think the question is now first as far as Pickett, him passing for 279 yards, 27 for 37 with 2 touchdowns. He did what he was supposed to do,
right?
And he also had 39 yards rushing. I like how he sneaks. The entire offense looks at what is going to happen, who's going to get the ball, and there he goes running up the middle somewhere. So I always like the way he scrambled. Let's go back to that Miami game in his coming out party a few years back.
Right.
But also, I think the running game itself rushed for 197 yards, but it was split up between several backs. The question is, who is their number one back? I think they're still trying to figure that out.
It's like a broken record because I swear on last year's post-game shows, that was the discussion. Does Pitt have a number one running back? Who will be that guy? Pitt is normally a program that hinges the running game on a number one running back. James Conner, for example.
Precisely.
That guy has not been there since Conner left and went to the NFL, and Pitt has still not really found that running back. You don't maybe need that guy against UMass, but you might need that guy against even Tennessee next week.
Oh, yeah.
That'll be a program program that they're necessarily not what they were when Peyton Manning and T. Martin were there, but they're still a major program, and they looked a little bit better than they've been in recent years already this year. So that'll be a nice test to Pitt for sure against Tennessee, more so against UMass. But Kenny Pickett, 27 for 37, 272, 7.4 per. A great day for him. 2 touchdowns.
Very great.
Quarterback rating, six rushes, 38 yards. West Virginia would love to have this quarterback play right now. Kenny Pickett, I mean, he's looking like a veteran who's been around a while.
He really is.
Certainly is a leader of this team. If this does have that special year that they're seemingly on the precipice of, but never can have happen under Narduzzi, it certainly would be because Kenny Pickett leads them there. And they're also fortunate that Kenny Pickett is still around, because he certainly maybe would not be around. That was a conversation even at this point last year. Now, what would you say outside of seeing Kenny Pickett and his offense finally explode? What else would you maybe say, maybe going to the even defensive side of the football, that you noticed from this Pitt team that looks better than last year, that maybe gives you more hope than last year? Because obviously a great defensive effort as well, only holding UMass to 7, and that's towards the end of the game. Hard to gauge it against UMass, but Pitt is getting a lot of hype entering this season. A lot of hype entering this season.
A lot of hype.
And that wasn't the case last year. They certainly didn't end well last year.
No.
Are you seeing anything now from one game in that gives other reason for this hype to be warranted besides just Kenny Pickett?
Yeah, and I don't want to sound premature when I say this, but the defense had a look to them. They had a swagger to them. Like, as if to say, you're not going anywhere, and we're going to make sure you're not going anywhere. I mean, they just pretty much shut down the run. And I was looking at the final stats on how often Lytle from Massachusetts was sacked. But they got sacked several times. And they if they could keep this up, because we know, I don't care how long you've lived on this earth and seen championship games, defense still wins championships.
Yeah.
And if this defense lives up to what Pat Narduzzi is known for, what he was known for back in Michigan State, then this will definitely be a special year, because then you'll start winning games and low score games as well. But the defense to only give up 7 points, and the 7 points came on the result of capitalizing off a turnover when the ball snapped over Nick Patty's head, the backup. You know, the fact is they pretty much did shut this team down. So I like the way they responded, and I mean the pressure they put on the UMass quarterbacks was pretty impressive. So yes, we want to see this when they start playing teams like Tennessee, SEC battle tested, as well as the Atlantic Coast Conference teams as well. But their defense showed me a lot today.
And you could certainly argue, and again, UMass, but you certainly can argue that we've seen a dominating performance from a Pitt team, even in victories against anyone, in a while. I mean, and again, Narduzzi came to Pitt with a defensive mindset. He has to bring that. That hasn't always been there, despite some talent being there with Hamlin and company. The defense sometimes has bended and then broke a little too much. So this effort could continue on, certainly could propel Pitt onto a pretty solid season. Ryan, getting you back involved here, going to the next couple weeks for West Virginia, and that does include the Virginia Tech game now. You lose this first game to Maryland. There's nothing else you can do about it other than brush your shoulders off and move on to the next one. I'm sure that's what Pete Brown's saying right now in his post-game press conference while we're doing this show. But it wasn't great. The turnovers were there, and that's certainly going to be a problem that needs cleaned up. A lot needs cleaned up for the Mountaineers to salvage this season. But going into next week and even the Virginia Tech game, figuring that next week would be a victory, what do you need to see from West Virginia? What needs cleaned up literally? What do you expect out of that game, even especially against Virginia Tech, who is more of an equal program to you after starting off the year with a 30-24 loss and 0-1 after Maryland?
I mean, the biggest things are what we've talked about earlier. You know, the secondary definitely needs to improve, especially later this Maryland game went on. There were some guys that were getting free runs downfield. That's where you saw younger Tua make some of those great throws that he made, and that's what put the game out of reach ultimately, with the secondary not covering. But I think the secondary did a pretty good job for most of this game, but a couple lapses ended up being pretty big and decisive in this game. One of the other things you got to see is especially the right side of that offensive line has to get a lot better between this week and especially heading into that Virginia Tech game in 2 weeks. A lot of breakdowns on that side of the offensive line. But again, it's those newer guys that are still trying to find their rhythm, trying to find that communication with the other side of that offensive line. I think that'll get worked out certainly next week and as the season moves on. Jared Deggy, I mean, that's got to be the focal point. I would like to assume he's going to look really good against the Long Island Sharks, because I think most teams should look really good against the Long Island Sharks.
Right.
But does he take those necessary steps this week in practice, next week in the game, next week, or the following week, I should say, in practice, look really good going into Virginia Tech? Those are the things that you really – Letty Brown, yes, he kind of disappeared a little bit there as the game went on, but I think that was more play calling than anything else, at least on that side of things. So, you're going to get a great game out of Letty Brown no matter when he straps on the shoulder pads. Those three things. Secondary, offensive line, quarterback play. That's what you need to do about.
Yeah, the offensive line not good enough, and if the offensive line is not better, the team can't do anything offensively. Jared Deggy can't do anything offensively. Letty Brown would even be a little hampered there. And certainly he's going to be a stud no matter what, as long as the game dictates him to be so. Although this is a problem when you kind of have your star and your best player be a running back. It's hard to come back. It's great if you're leading, but it's hard to come back. And Jared Deggy's not necessarily the Will Greer that can lead you on comebacks and put points on the board really, really fast.
Right.
He's more methodical, and then he ruins drives, so he needs to clean things up. Certainly, you figure, is going to leave the next game with a lot more confidence after Long Island, with a lot more confidence. But again, like we're discussing with Pitt versus UMass, it's hard to really gauge a program off of a team like that. Even though, as Ray put it, and certainly makes sense, and we've seen this before, nothing is guaranteed. You got to take care of business. You certainly nothing is guaranteed by any means, and taking care of business impressively. I think that's the one thing that's an advantage for Pitt, and Pitt fans can take comfort in. You didn't just beat UMass. 50-plus points is what you want to see West Virginia be able to hang on a Long Island team as well. That's what West Virginia needs to do with those teams that at least Pitt is doing. So that West Virginia has pressure now certainly on them. Neil Brown has pressure on them to not only get a win, but get a big convincing win, and then be able to play well against Virginia Tech. And their good thing.
The good thing I did want to say, though, is that we've made it, I think, 20-plus minutes now. I haven't mentioned the receivers, and that's because they really didn't drop the balls. I know they had like one or two.
Yeah, a couple, they
drops. But I think at one point there in the third quarter, the broadcast crew cited 3 or 4 drops. I didn't really see what they were saying in terms of drops. It's one of those, I think it's kind of, it's a judgment call stat to me, drops it. But, I mean, for the most part, any pass that wasn't completed was behind a receiver, over a receiver, went right to the defense. If the ball was there for the receiver to have, more times than not, it was caught today, which is a good sign for WVU. Certainly something you needed to see out of this game. So that's certainly a positive for Mountaineer fans. You don't have to talk about drops today like you did all of last year. Yeah,
and I will say that's another positive, because that was something that needed to be worked on through the offseason. Yeah, and last year, the defense of Jared Deggy, which I had said myself, is he only has a certain ceiling, and if the receivers are dropping passes, they're making it harder on him. There were some passes that were money that they would drop. In this game, it appeared that if he threw it on target, they caught it, and if he didn't throw it on target, maybe they would quote-unquote drop it. But there were some passes that he sailed a little high. That's why you saw so many turnovers and why they led to turnovers. Wrapping things up, though, Ray, going to that game against Tennessee. I mean, you take care of business against UMass. You land-based UMass. Kenny Pickett looks like an all-pro. Everything goes well for Pitt, diversifying the offense on the ground through the receivers. The defense puts up a stellar effort as well. But again, UMass, what do you need to see and what do you expect to see in the game against Tennessee? What would be some keys to that game against Tennessee, which certainly a program much more on your level, even though they also need to improve themselves, kind of try to get back to glory as well?
To quote Mike Tomlin again, the standard is the standard. I just wanted to have an excuse to say that. But
you got to get that out there. I cover the Steelers as well, so we've personally heard that a lot. So yeah, the standard is the standard.
The way Pitt played in each quarter, they scored at least 10 points.
Right.
Next week, you have to just capitalize. You get into the red zone, you got to score touchdowns. You can't settle for field goals and then do the happy dance. Now, if the final points result in the win, 3 points, that's one thing, but don't go up 6-0 against a Tennessee team in the first quarter when you should have been 14-0. So I think the key is capitalize on your scoring opportunities and get into the end zone. Watch the mistakes, watch the false starts, watch the offensive pass interference, watch the ineligible receiver downfield. Right. You got to be ready because you're playing at their home, and that's regardless.
That's a tough place to play.
Thank you, exactly. And what is it with the media, the local media here, saying that Tennessee's a horrible team? I heard someone just say that yesterday. Tennessee's terrible.
They might be going off of Tennessee the last few years. Tennessee did get a victory, a big win over Bowling Green, 38-6. So they looked good in week 1.
They did.
This isn't Peyton Manning's Tennessee Volunteers. I think maybe some people are hard on Tennessee because they think they're with Alabama, but they're not. But they certainly could beat Pitt. That's going to be a home game. Tennessee's looked good. You could argue Bowling Green's more of a test than UMass. If they find quarterback play as well, I would say one key from just watching some of that game. They do a lot on the ground. A lot on the ground.
Yeah.
So if Pitt can handle the ground game, that's an easy team maybe to scheme against. If they can stop the quarterback play and create some turnovers, Pitt should potentially be able to take care of business against Tennessee. But that would be a big win. That would be the staple win for Pitt to be able to say, okay, this is going to be a different year. Maybe for the first time under Narduzzi, they could get to 9 wins. Pitt has never won 9 games under Narduzzi.
No.
This could be the year, but certainly winning that game against Tennessee, even though it's not a conference game, that would still set the tone. That would be a staple win. That would tell people in conference, Clemson, Notre Dame, it's a better Pitt team this year than you've seen the last couple years. They go into Tennessee, and Tennessee wins by 10 or 15. Since Tennessee is not yet an elite program, they're kind of middle of the road as well. That may show some Pitt fans that maybe they're not there yet. So that's a big game for Pitt, kind of like
it certainly is.
what West Virginia had against Maryland, and they dropped the ball. So we'll see if Pitt can handle it and pick it up and do well against Tennessee. I appreciate both of you guys being on the show for sure. Ray, I'll let you get home as you were covering the game in person there at Heinz Field. Big win against UMass, start off the season 1-0, and then, of course, not the same situation for West Virginia, a 38-24 loss against Maryland, although maybe a higher level opponent, but it doesn't matter. West Virginia's now going to get that game against that quote-unquote gimme win next week, and we'll see what they do. They got to take care of business. Pitt took care of business. We will see if West Virginia can as well. So, again, guys, I definitely appreciate you both being on the program, and we'll talk
Thank you.
We'll talk to you again throughout the rest of the season. Definitely hope to get both of you back on. So have a good rest of your night. Have a good rest of your summer/fall, whatever you celebrate right now. Have a good rest.
Right.
On this Saturday, absolutely. So again, Ray Porter Jr. with me, and Ryan Decker of WBOY, and Ray Porter Jr. of Urban Media Today. Ray covering that game at Heinz Field. Pitt's big victory over UMass. And Kenny Pickett, honestly, he takes a little bit too much flack from me, from some of these fans. He's been getting flack the last several years from some of these fans. He's not Dan Marino by any means, but he's good enough to lead you. He's asked to do a lot. I actually think Pitt would be better off if he's not asked to do as much as he was in this game. Maybe showcasing himself, though, because, of course, it was UMass. But Kenny Pickett quieting the doubters. I'm happy he's back for his sake. He's a kid to root for sure. There's no really reason to root against him. A nice guy, tries hard, and has continuously progressed over the years. Really the leader of this team. Does it through the air, does it on the ground. If the offensive line holds, if they get several weapons as receivers, it's usually been one man. If they can kind of diversify things, get more versatile, and then can maybe find a running back, as they haven't been able to do that yet, that'll make it easier on Kenny Pickett. But a great game from Kenny Pickett, to say the very, very least. It was UMass. We'll now see what happens against Tennessee. But Kenny Pickett quieting doubters, and I don't think Pitt fans give him enough credit. I don't think Pitt fans realize how good he is or give him the credit to being as good as he is. But the story for Pitt, basically perfect football. It could have been better early on, as Ray put it. You got to have those field goals be touchdowns against programs like Tennessee, maybe not UMass. You can turn it on late. You can't do that against more equal teams to you. And that game on the road in Knoxville with 100K or whatever they're allowed to have at that point, a rocking house, and a fan base that maybe hasn't been too excited about not being allowed at stadiums in recent years, potentially where that state falls on the map, color code wise, if you know what I'm saying. Not going to be easy for Pitt. Not going to be easy. I'm not saying Tennessee is an elite team. I'm not saying they're a great team. I'm not saying they're near to where maybe they think they are, but they're not bad either, as Ray and I talked. Some people thinking that or maybe underestimating Tennessee. They are one-dimensional, so Pitt has that advantage as well in terms of scheming against them, but a big game against Tennessee to kind of gauge this Pitt team going into conference games, going into a season in which many are predicting Pitt to legitimately win 9 or even more games, potentially win the Coastal, get back in the ACC championship game. Yeah, you might get blown out to Clemson, but get back to that at least level, which not the case, of course, last year. And West Virginia, as Ryan and I discussed, got to be better at the quarterback position. And if you're changing quarterbacks and Jared Deggy's not your starter a couple games from now, then your season's totally in the tubes. And this is a year where you go from climbing to falling totally off the mountain. But Jared Deggy needs to be better. Just does. You can't throw that many interceptions. You can't have your offense turn it over 4 times. That does include one by Brown. But it just can't happen. Brown's asked to do too much. He's not going to be the guy to help you come back. He's a running back that has to be on the quarterback. You can't implode late in games as the QB, sailing passes that end up being picks and ruining solid field position. If not for West Virginia's solid field position, where would this team even have been offensively, and would they even have had the earlier touchdowns? So it might even have been a blowout for Maryland. The defense needs to be better as well, but maybe the secondary would be against maybe a lesser quarterback. That was rough against Tua. Special teams did it returning-wise, didn't do it otherwise, so that needs to be improved. Neil Brown didn't have his best day. Neil Brown has pressure to have this team look good next week. So it might not be a team that you're going to really brag about beating, but you do need to take care of business like Pitt did against UMass. You need to do so impressively like Pitt did against UMass. And then for West Virginia, going into Virginia Tech, another rivalry game, although I think that one's more of a rivalry, by the way. Don't have to do a show about that one. You got to be better. You got to take care of the football. You got to be smarter, and you just flat out got to be better, or this will be a rough year. You get the 7, you get the bowl game, you get that victory. You think there's a climb. Right now, it's a question mark on whether that climb really, really exists. It is year 3 for Neil Brown. Loved by everybody. I think he's the right guy. I think he likes being there. I think he's a proper fit. He's doing it recruiting-wise, as they have a great recruiting class coming in for years to come. Top 20 in the nation, which you wouldn't always expect out of West Virginia. But got to be better wins and loss-wise. Got to be better certain calls, certain play calls, certain decisions in-game against teams like this. That's a barometer game against Maryland, just like Pitt will have against Tennessee. West Virginia didn't look good. Did not look good. They failed the barometer test. We will now see what Pitt does in their barometer test on the road in even more of a hostile environment at Tennessee. That'll do it for this college football edition here of Pittsburgh Postgame on PSL. This is our first such college football postgame show here throughout the network this season. Of course, this is a combo show due to the kickoff times. They won't always be this way, guys. They won't always be combo shows. I know these fan bases probably maybe they're rolling their eyes. Not always going to be like this, but it had to be, or else you'd be waiting for 2 hours for postgame shows when they kick off within a half hour of each other. Question mark about whether we'll be having some of these for Penn State as well. Maybe that'll happen. Certainly big games. I'll bring them to you if nothing else, by the way. But Nittany Sports now has the game recap for Penn State's win over Wisconsin. Of course, head over to WV Sports now. Julia Mallett was over there in Maryland with the coverage for us. So head over there for her game recap and any of our stories with that post-game coverage. And, of course, Pittsburgh Sports now, our Alan Saunders, covering Pitt, as always, has his game recap and that coverage over there at Pittsburgh Sports now. Any of our post-game video reaction here at Pittsburgh Sports Live. Hit the subscribe button for all this content and notification when any of these shows go live or any of that content gets released. Again, thanks to Ray Porter Jr. of Urban Media Today and Ryan Decker of WBOY, a TV station in West Virginia. I'm Mike Asti. Pitt gets a win. They take care of business. West Virginia struggles. Loses a tough one against a quote-unquote rival on the road to Maryland. Question marks around both of these two teams still, but certainly Pitt fans have a lot more reason for optimism